My name is Leilani. Some secrets are too painful to carry, but too dangerous to reveal. They sit in your chest. They wrap around your ribs. You think you can bury them. Lock them away. Pretend they never happened. But secrets don't stay buried. They don't disappear. They haunt you. They change you. And no matter how much you try to move on, they follow you. I never thought I'd betray my own mother, but I did. I never thought I'd become the kind of person who could do something like this. Who could cross that line? Who could break the one person who trusted me the most? But I did. And now I have to live with it. It wasn't planned. It wasn't forced. But it was wrong. And the worst part? I knew it was wrong, and I did it anyway. Think about that night more than I should. I try to remember the exact moment when it all changed. When a harmless glance became something else. When comfort turned into temptation. When silence started speaking louder than words. But the truth? There wasn't just one moment. It happened in pieces. In stolen glances. In words that meant more than they should have. In touches that lingered too long. And then, before I could stop it, before I even realized what was happening, it wasn't just a mistake waiting to happen. It was happening. And I let it. If you knew the truth would destroy your family, would you still confess? Before we begin, I need to warn you. This story contains mature themes. It deals with betrayal, guilt, and the kind of mistakes that leave scars. Some of what you hear may be uncomfortable. If these topics are too much, I understand if you want to stop now. But if you stay, I promise you this. By the time we reach the end, you'll understand. You'll see how one moment can change everything. And maybe, you'll wonder what you would have done if you were me. This is what happened. Before everything changed, my life was simple. Predictable. Safe. I was 18. A senior in high school. The kind of girl teachers trusted. The kind of daughter mothers were proud of. I didn't drink. I didn't sneak out. I did what I was supposed to do. I followed the rules. And for a long time I believed that was enough. That if I did everything right, my life would stay steady. That nothing would shake the foundation beneath me. I was wrong. My mother, Beatrice Estes, was my anchor. My guide. My best friend. She raised me on her own for most of my life, and I never once felt like I was missing anything. She worked long hours, sometimes 2 jobs, but she never let me feel it. She was exhausted, but she never showed it. She carried the weight of the world on her shoulders, but somehow, she always had enough room to carry me too. She was warmth. She was love. She was safety. And then Coulson came along. The first time I met him, I remember thinking how steady he seemed. He wasn't loud. He wasn't overly charming. He was just there. Solid. The kind of man who looked people in the eye when he spoke. Who listened when others talked. The kind of man who blended into the background until you realized he had been paying attention the entire time. I liked him. I really did. He wasn't like the other men my mother had dated. He wasn't temporary. He wasn't a passing interest. He was serious. Stable. And most of all, he made her happy. And I wanted that for her. I wanted her to have someone who saw her the way I did. Someone who would take care of her the way she had taken care of me. She deserved that. And for a long time I believed he was exactly what she needed. They got married after a year of dating. Nothing flashy, just a small ceremony with close friends and family. My mother wore a light blue dress, soft, delicate, nothing extravagant. She didn't need extravagance. She just needed love. And for a while, she had it. Coulson was good to her. He took care of things she never had time for. He fixed leaky faucets. He made sure the car was always running. He picked up groceries on his way home from work without her even asking. He did all the things a good husband should do. But love is tricky. It doesn't just fade overnight. It wears down in pieces. It erodes so slowly you don't even realize it's disappearing until one day, you wake up, and it's just gone. I think that's what happened to them. Somewhere between their wedding vows and the late-night feedings, between the I love yous and the quiet sighs at the dinner table, something changed. It wasn't big. It wasn't loud. It was just different. And the worst part? I don't even think they noticed. If you looked at us from the outside, you'd think we were a perfect family. My mother had a husband who provided for her. I had a stepfather who treated me with kindness. We had a house that felt warm, safe. A baby brother who brought us joy. There was laughter at the dinner table, pictures on the walls, an unspoken rhythm to our lives. But perfect is just a word. Just a picture people paint to keep themselves from seeing what's underneath. And underneath? There were cracks forming. Small at first. Barely noticeable. But once something starts breaking, it's only a matter of time before it falls apart completely. It started slow. So slow that I almost missed it. At first, it was little things, Coulson working later than usual, coming home tired, barely speaking during dinner. My mother would ask how his day was, and he'd just nod, say fine, and go back to eating. She used to tease him, try to pull him out of whatever thoughts were keeping him distant. But after a while, she stopped trying. I think she was tired too. She was balancing work, the house, and Santiago, who was still waking up in the middle of the night. She barely had time to breathe, let alone notice that something was shifting between her and her husband. Or maybe she did notice. Maybe she just didn't have the energy to fix it. But I noticed. I noticed the way Coulson sat at the dinner table, staring at nothing for too long, his mind somewhere else. I noticed the way he exhaled before walking into the house, like he had to prepare himself to be there. I noticed the way my mother started talking about him less. How she started moving around him instead of with him, like they were two separate people just living in the same space. And I noticed something else too. I started seeing him differently. I don't know when it started. Maybe it was the first time I caught him watching me when he thought I wasn't looking. Or maybe it was before that. Maybe it was in the way he spoke to me, softer than the way he spoke to my mother. Maybe it was the way his voice dropped when he asked me about my day. The way he listened. The way he saw me. I told myself I was imagining it. That I was reading too much into things. That I was making something out of nothing. But then there were the moments I couldn't ignore. The way his eyes lingered a second too long when I walked into the room. The way his fingers brushed mine when he handed me something, like he wasn't in a rush to pull away. The way he said my name sometimes, low, careful, like he was testing the weight of it in his mouth. I should have told myself to stop. I should have turned away. But instead, I started paying attention. And that was my first mistake. When my mother told me she was leaving for a few days, I didn't think much of it. She was visiting her sister, taking a well-earned break. I told her she deserved it. She smiled, kissed Santiago's forehead, and told me she trusted me to take care of things while she was gone. She kissed me too. Brushed my hair back, looked at me the way only a mother can. Take care of your brother, okay? Of course, Mom, I said. I meant it. I didn't know that was the first promise I would break. She walked out the door that night without a second thought. Without hesitation. Without knowing she was leaving behind the one thing that could destroy her. She didn't know. And I didn't stop it. That first night without my mother in the house, everything felt the same. But something was different. I couldn't explain it. The air felt heavier. Colder in a way I couldn't name. Maybe it was all in my head. Maybe I was imagining it. Or maybe I wasn't. It started with a movie. Santiago had finally fallen asleep, and I went downstairs, too restless to stay in my room. The living room was dim, the only light coming from the flickering images on the screen. I curled up on the couch, letting the low hum of dialogue fill the empty spaces in my head. I thought I was alone. And then, out of nowhere, I heard footsteps. I turned my head, and there he was, Coulson. Standing in the doorway, watching me. For a second, neither of us said anything. He looked tired. The kind of tired that didn't come from lack of sleep. The kind that sat deeper, behind the eyes, in the bones. "Can't sleep?" I asked, keeping my voice light. He hesitated for a moment, then shook his head. No, he walked over and sat down, not too close, but not far either. Just there. The space between us suddenly felt too small. We watched in silence for a while. I wasn't paying attention to the movie anymore. I could hear his breathing. I could feel the warmth of his body, just inches away from mine. And then, he spoke. "I don't feel like myself anymore." I turned to him, my brows drawing together. "What do you mean?" Coulson exhaled, rubbing his jaw. "I don't know. I used to know who I was. What I wanted. But now, I feel like I'm disappearing." Something about the way he said it made my stomach tighten. Maybe because I understood. "I feel that way too sometimes," I admitted, before I could stop myself. He looked at me then. Really looked. And for the first time I wasn't sure what I saw in his eyes. Sadness? Longing? Regret? "Yeah," he murmured, voice low. I nodded. "Yeah." It should have ended there. I should have changed the subject, made a joke, gotten up and walked away. But I didn't. We kept talking. About my mom. About the baby. About how love changes, how people change, how you wake up one day and realize the life you built doesn't feel like yours anymore. His voice was quieter than usual, like he was admitting something he shouldn't. Like he was saying things out loud for the first time. And then, there was a pause. A long, heavy silence that stretched between us. It was in that silence that everything shifted. I felt it before I understood it. A current in the air, thick and charged, pulling at something deep inside me. My eyes flicked toward him, just for a second. But he was already looking at me. And neither of us looked away. I swallowed, my throat dry. I should have broken the moment. I should have blinked, laughed, moved. But I didn't. His gaze dropped, to my mouth, just for a fraction of a second. And that's when I felt it, something dark, something dangerous curling between us, settling in the spaces we hadn't yet filled. A slow breath left his lips. His hand shifted on the couch, fingers resting on the space between us. Not touching. But close. Too close. And then, without thinking, I moved. Just an inch. Just enough. His fingers brushed against mine. And I didn't pull away. It could have ended there. I could have pulled away. I could have laughed, shaken it off, told myself it was nothing. That it was in my head. That I was imagining it. But I didn't. I sat there, still, quiet, my skin burning where his fingers had brushed mine. And he didn't move either. The house was silent. The only sound was the low hum of the TV, the distant tick of the clock on the wall. But between us, there was something louder. Something neither of us said out loud, but both of us felt. And then, he reached for me. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't fast. It was slow, too slow, like we were both giving ourselves time to stop it, time to turn away. But we didn't. His hand skimmed over my arm, up to my shoulder, fingers pressing lightly, like he was memorizing the way I felt beneath them. I wasn't breathing. My whole body had gone still, locked in place, waiting. And then, he pulled me in. It wasn't a kiss, not yet. Just a hug. Just warmth. Just his arms around me, his chin resting on top of my head, his breath steady, but heavy. I closed my eyes. I let my forehead press against his chest. His heartbeat was slow, controlled. But I knew mine wasn't. I should have pulled away. I should have said something. Instead, I stayed. At first, it was nothing. Just comfort. Just a moment. But then his hand slid lower, down my back, fingers pressing into my waist. I tilted my head up, just slightly. And when I did, his breath caught. Our faces were close now. Too close. I could feel the warmth of him, the heat radiating off his skin. His lips were just there, inches from mine. Neither of us moved. We were frozen in the moment before everything changes. The kind of moment you can't undo. And then, he closed the distance. His lips brushed mine, not a kiss, not yet. Just enough to feel the weight of it. Just enough to know that if we went any further, we couldn't take it back. And for a second, just a second, the world didn't exist. It was just us. Just the way his hands curled against my back, just the way my fingers gripped the front of his shirt. Just the fire spreading beneath my skin, setting everything inside me on edge. I should have pulled away, but I didn't. I let it happen. And the moment I did, I knew everything had changed. The second it was over, the weight of it crashed down on me so fast I could barely breathe. I pulled away first. My hands felt like they didn't belong to me, my skin too hot, my stomach twisted so tight it hurt. Coulson inhaled sharply. His face was unreadable, his jaw clenched like he was fighting to keep himself together. Neither of us spoke. Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. Like the house itself knew what we had done and was holding its breath, waiting for us to admit it. Finally, he broke it. This can't happen again. But we both knew it was a lie. The morning after, everything looked the same. The sun still rose. The walls still stood. The world kept turning. But I wasn't the same. And neither was he. I woke up to the sound of birds outside my window. Soft, distant, barely there. My body felt heavy, like it wasn't mine, like I had borrowed it for the night and now I didn't know how to return it. For a few seconds, I forgot. Just a few. The hazy space between sleep and waking where the world is quiet, where nothing exists, but the sheets tangled around me and the air on my skin. And then it hit me. Last night. His hands. His breath. His lips brushing against mine. The way I let it happen. The way I didn't stop him. A sharp, sudden wave of nausea rolled through me. I sat up too fast, my head spinning, my stomach twisting. I barely made it to the bathroom before I was on my knees, hands gripping the cold porcelain of the toilet, trying to keep myself from falling apart. I wanted to scrub my skin raw. I wanted to tear last night out of my head and erase it, delete it, burn it down until nothing was left. But no matter how hard I tried, it was still there. It was inside me now, woven into my bones, a stain I couldn't wash away. I stayed in my room for hours. I didn't move. I didn't open my door. I just sat on my bed, staring at the floor, willing time to rewind. I could hear Santiago fussing downstairs, could hear Coulson moving around the kitchen. The clinking of dishes, the low murmur of the TV. Everything was normal. Ordinary. Like nothing had happened. But something had happened. And I didn't know how to face it. Then, I heard the footsteps. Slow. Measured. Stopping right outside my door. A knock. I didn't answer. Another knock. A pause. Then, his voice. Leilani. I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping the blanket in my fists, my nails digging into my palms. Another pause. And then he knocked again, firmer this time. Can we talk? No. I couldn't. I couldn't talk about it, couldn't let the words exist outside my own head. If we talked about it, it would be real. And if it was real, I would have to admit what I had done. Leilani, about last night, don't. The word shot out of my mouth before I could stop it, sharp, cutting, final. Silence. I could hear his breath on the other side of the door. Could feel him standing there. Waiting. Hoping I would let him in. But I didn't. And finally, he walked away. I thought if I ignored it, it would go away. I thought if I stayed quiet, if I pretended hard enough, I could erase it. But secrets don't disappear just because you want them to. They grow. And this one? This one was already too big to contain. And I knew it wasn't over. Secrets change things. They shift the way people move, the way they speak, the way they breathe in the same room. And Coulson? He was changing. The first thing I noticed was the way he watched me. Before, his eyes would pass over me like I was just there, another person in the house, nothing more. But now? Now, when I walked into a room, I felt it. The weight of his gaze. The hesitation before he looked away. Like he was waiting for something. Like he was expecting me to speak first. I didn't. At breakfast, he barely touched his food. He kept shifting in his chair, clearing his throat, glancing at me, then back down at his plate. The silence between us was loud. Deafening. Santiago cooed in his high chair, banging a plastic spoon against the tray. I focused on that, the sound of something normal. Something innocent. Something untouched by what we had done. Coulson set his coffee down too hard, the mug clinking against the table. I have to head out early today. His voice was tight, clipped. I just nodded. He waited. I didn't look at him. And then he sighed, pushing back his chair, walking out the door like the house was suffocating him. Maybe it was. That night, my mother called. I almost didn't answer. My fingers hovered over the screen, my pulse hammering, my stomach twisting so tight I thought I might be sick again. But then I forced a smile. Forced normal. Pressed accept. Her face filled the screen, bright, warm, unaware. "How's my baby girl?" she asked, beaming. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "I'm good, Mom." It was the biggest lie I'd ever told. Her eyes softened. "And Santiago? How's my little angel?" "Perfect," I said, because that was the only thing that was still true. And then, she asked about him. "How's Coulson?" "He's been quiet when I text him." "He okay?" My heart slammed against my ribs. He was different. I knew that. I had felt it. Seen it. But what was I supposed to say? I forced another smile, but I could feel the way my lips trembled. "Yeah, he's just been busy." Her smile didn't falter, but I saw the way her brows creased just slightly, the way she studied my face, like she was searching for something beneath the surface. I held my breath. And then, just when I thought she was going to ask more, she sighed. "Men can be like that sometimes. He loves you, you know. Both of you." My stomach twisted violently. I almost dropped the phone. I nodded, said something, I don't even remember what, and rushed to end the call, my voice too bright, too forced. "Can't wait to see you, Mom." "Me too, sweetheart. Take care of your brother for me." "I will," I promised. Another lie. I told myself it was a mistake. That it was over. That I would never let it happen again. But deep down, I knew the truth. I knew it wasn't over. It had only just begun. There are moments in life where you look at yourself and don't recognize what you've become. I used to think I was a good person. I used to believe that as long as I did the right things, as long as I followed the rules, my life would stay steady. That I would never be the kind of person who did something unforgivable. But then I stood in front of the mirror, and I didn't know who was looking back at me. The bathroom light was harsh, too bright. It cast shadows on my face that I didn't recognize. My skin looked pale, my eyes too wide, too dark, like something inside me had been hollowed out. I leaned forward, my fingers gripping the edge of the sink. My reflection stared back, silent, accusing. "Who are you?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to shatter the mirror, to make sure I never had to see this version of myself again. I thought about telling my mother. About sitting her down and spilling the truth. About her face breaking as the words left my mouth, about the way her whole world would crack apart because of me. Would she cry? Would she scream? Would she ever forgive me? I swallowed hard, forcing the thought down, forcing myself to breathe. If I told the truth, I would ruin my mother's life. But if I didn't, I would ruin mine. And I had no idea which was worse. That night, the house was quiet. The kind of quiet that felt unnatural, like the walls themselves were waiting for something to break. I was walking to my room when I heard his voice. "Leilani." I froze. He was standing at the bottom of the stairs, watching me. His face was unreadable, his hands clenched at his sides. For a moment, neither of us spoke. And then, so softly I almost didn't hear it, he whispered, "We both have to move on from this." His voice wasn't firm. It wasn't strong. It was uncertain. Like he wanted to believe it, but he didn't. I opened my mouth to say something. To agree. To fight. To scream. I don't know. But no words came out. Instead, I just turned and walked away. And I didn't look back. I thought that was the end of it. I thought we could forget. Move on. Pretend it never happened. But pretending doesn't make things disappear. Some mistakes don't just fade. Some keep pulling you back in. There's no happy ending to this story. No way to fix it. No way to undo it. No way to go back to the girl I was before. I have replayed it 1,000 times in my head, trying to find the exact moment where I could have stopped it. Where I could have turned away. Where I could have chosen differently. But no matter how many times I rewind, the ending is always the same. People think the worst part of a mistake is getting caught. But that's not true. The worst part is waking up every day knowing you did something unforgivable. Carrying it like a shadow that never leaves, like a scar you can't show anyone. My mother came home, smiling, happy, safe in the life she thought she had. She hugged me. Told me she missed